السلام عليكم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. يا الصلاة يا الصلاة يا للفلاح يا للفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الحمد لله ثم الحمد لله. الحمد لله الذي هداني لهذا ما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. نستعينه ونستغفره. نعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. فمن يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل الله فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه وخليله خير الذي اجتباه هدى للعالمين. أرسله بشيرا ونذيرا سيدا للعالمين كافة. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم تنزيله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. صدق الله العظيم. أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. يا أيها الغافلون أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله عز وجل وأحثكم على طاعته وعلى اتباع هدي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم والتمسك بالكتاب الكريم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All praises are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in shakartum lazidannakum. Allah says, if you are grateful, you are thankful, we'll continue to increase you and continue to bless you with that which will bless you in this life and definitely in the hereafter. Alhamdulillah, brothers and sisters. So this khutbah is a continuation of my khutbah from last week. And I have mentioned one of the verses of Allah, the statements of Allah. We relate to you their story with truth. The story of the youth. And you might have heard the statement of history or the word history. And some people have mentioned that the word history contains two words, his and story. His story, depending on who relates the information, who gives the information about what happened in the past or what is happening. Because as we know, even what is being related about what is happening in Palestine by the media, there are a lot of falsehoods in their in their stories. A lot of falsehood that they are making, and they are they're not stating the facts. And if we really delve into history of what happened in the past, especially here in America, we'll realize that many of the information that they have related is not true. Or they are stating half-truths. Half-truths. Similarly, in most of us who are Christians, like myself, the Bible has some truths and a lot of falsehood. If you read the Bible, you'll realize there are some truths, but a lot of falsehood. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the Quran to bring us into all truths. So in that verse I recited, we relate to you the story with truth. Because many a times stories can be half truths or in it there is a lot of falsehood. But Allah says whatever He relates is with truth. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relates is with truth. So many of you probably heard, but if you didn't know, that tomorrow, June 19th, it has been made a federal holiday called Juneteenth. Juneteenth. Why was it made a federal holiday? They say that because they gave freedom to the slaves, the Emancipation Proclamation. But in reality, why this was made a holiday, June 19th, 2.5 years after President Lincoln signed this proclamation to give freedom to the slaves, it wasn't announced, it wasn't instituted all across America. Because even at this time when he signed this proclamation, it was only for the North. The South was still segregated. The blacks in the South were still in slavery. And when he signed this, many of the blacks slaves didn't know that they were free. They didn't let them know. So they were still in slavehood for another 2.5 years. And the last state to find out that slavery was abolished was Texas. Right? So his story, they will tell you that Lincoln freed the slaves. His story, meaning how they relate what really happened. But what really happened, Frederick Douglass, one of the luminaries, one of the leaders, African-American leaders here in America, he's one of the ones who forced Lincoln to sign this or to emancipate the slaves. Because in the beginning, Lincoln didn't want to emancipate the slaves. So when he went to Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, and presented his case to him, he wanted to send the slaves, the blacks, to colonize them in South America. He said, no, we're not going to give them freedom, but we will send them to South America. This is what he wanted to do. But when the war started, the Civil War started between the North and the South, the Confederate Army, the North was losing. Lincoln was losing. He was losing the war. So Frederick Douglass presented to him another option. He says, what you need more soldiers. And if you allow the blacks to join your army, you will have more bodies and more people to fight on your side against the Confederate army. So he agreed, but without first agreeing to giving freedom to the slaves. So when the blacks joined the army, there were over 200,000 who joined the army, and they were able to defeat the Southern army. They were able to defeat, but in the beginning, Lincoln didn't want to, but he was forced to. He was forced to give them the freedom because he wanted to win the war, right? So this is an example for us, brothers and sisters. This is an example for us when we're dealing, like I've mentioned so many times, that in every historical venture here in America, the powers to be, those who empower the whites, did not want to change, but they were forced to change. They were forced to make the changes. They were forced to free the slaves. They were forced to get rid of the Jim Crow laws, the segregation. They were forced to do it. They were forced, right? And so after that, so now we have mass incarceration here in America. A majority of those who are incarcerated are Black and brown people, not because they commit more crimes. And this is the fact that Black and white commit more crimes commit crimes at the same rate. Commit crimes at the same rate. And here in America, you know, the whites are, in terms of numbers, there are more. So Black and whites, Blacks are only 14% of the population, 14 to 15% of the population. So if Blacks and whites commit crimes at the same rate, use drugs at the same rate, then who should be more in prison? The whites should be more numbers in prison. But Blacks and brown people, the Blacks and the Hispanics, Latinos, are 6.5 times more in prison than whites. So, brothers, I'm talking about history here. That we have to learn about history. In every movement here in America, the movement that was instituted to eradicate slavery, the one that was instituted to eradicate segregation in the Jim Crow laws, and the civil rights movement, the majority of those who stood up, who were activists, were the youth. Were what? The youth. Frederick Douglass, he was a slave. He was a slave, but he wanted freedom. He had aspirations to be free, not only for himself, but for his people, the African Americans, the Black Americans here in America. When he first escaped from the South, he was how old? 16 years old. 16 years old. And if we go, brothers and sisters, into the history or the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those who first became Muslims. Yes, we know Khadija radiallahu anha was the first of the women to become Muslim. The first of the men to become Muslim was Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. The first of the youth to become Muslim was Ali radiallahu anhu. But the majority, and the majority of the people who became Muslim were the poor, the downtrodden. But the majority of those who were Muslims in the beginning were the youth, 13 years old, 14 years old, 16 years old. This is the commonality in all of those movements, not only the Islamic movements, but also the Muslims, the movement that occurred here in America. There were youth. And those, and the verse I recited, I relate to you their story in truth, the story of the youth of the cave. There were youth. There were around the age of puberty and above, in their teens. But they had a vision. They had an objective, right? They had an aspiration. This is the nature of the youth, because they have an aspiration to do better for the future, to have a better future. So they stood up. They stood up. And this is an example for us, right? And I said last week that you have the oppressor, and you have those who are oppressed. And then you have the tools of oppression. So what are some of the tools of oppression I mentioned that they're using? One of the things that they try to instill fear into their hearts. They try to instill fear. That's one. Incarcerate, to punish, to kill, to create mayhem. All these things they try to implement because they want to prevent any form of uprising. And this is what they did here in America to the African Americans. Though they killed them, they segregated them. And then after the Civil Rights Movement, around the Civil Rights Movement, when they started to stand up and protest and boycott, what they do? They took away the jobs. They moved the jobs out of America and shipped them overseas in the late 60s, early 70s. Because because at this time the blacks they had even though they didn't have good jobs, but they used to work in the factories, and that they were able to support their families. So the powers that be knew that. Even when they were marching and protesting, they helped each other. They brought each other food and assistance with the money that they earned from their jobs. So in the 60s and 70s, early 70s, over 70% of Black men had jobs. So they realized that, the powers to be realized that. So they took up the jobs. And what happened when they took up the jobs? They became depressed. Imagine you cannot take care of your families. You have no money, you have no wealth. You cannot support your families. How would you feel? You had no way to take care of your families, right? So they became depressed. And at this time, they didn't have a true understanding of Allah, of God. So they had nowhere to turn to. No one to turn to, but the Muslims that we have, even we lose our jobs, we have someone to turn to. We have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like the one who necked his stepped on. Right? We all know the story where it happened. When the officer stepped on his neck in Minnesota and he killed him. What was the last thing he said? He said, "Mommy, mommy." He called his mom. Why? Why he called his mama? Because that was the most truthful statement he could say at that moment. He didn't have any other truthful statement to say besides his mother. She was the most truest person he knew in his life. It's different from what Bilal radiallahu anhu said when they had the boulder on his chest. He had the boulder on his chest. Who did he call upon? Allah, Allah, Allah. He called upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when they took away the jobs, they fell into a state of depression. And they knew that, the powers to be knew that. And then what happened next? They brought in the drugs. They started bringing the drugs in the inner cities, because this is where they segregated the blacks. This is why many of you came to America. You found many of the blacks and Hispanics in the inner cities, because it was a system that was planned. It was a system that was planned. So many of you wonder, why so many blacks in the inner cities? Why they don't have jobs? You don't know, because you didn't read the history of America before you came here. You didn't read the history of America before you came here. And I told the story of Joha. Joha's traveled with his son. And he said, Joha said to his son, oh my son, we're traveling, we're going on a journey. You'll ride on the donkey first. And then when I get tired, I will ride. So Joha is riding. His son is riding first. When he got to the first town, people in the town say, look at this son. His poor father. He doesn't have no respect for his father. He has no respect for his father. Astaghfirullah. What kind of son is this? So Joha heard the people of the town talking. People talk. This is what they do. Then they left the town and went, and they said, let's go to another town. They traveled to another town, and they agreed that Joha will ride and his son will walk. So when they got to the next town, Joha's riding, and the people of the next town said, astaghfirullah, look at Joha. Look how he's disrespecting his, he has no respect for his son. Look how he's treating his son. He's riding and the son's walking in this hot desert. So they left the town and they go to the next town. And they said, okay, let allow the donkey to rest. Because this is from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. You work your animal for 8 hours, you give him rest for 8 hours, and you feed him. So they decided to let the animal rest. So they left the town and went to the next town. And when they were going to the next town, no one's riding the donkey. When they got to the town, they said, oh, astaghfirullah, they are so gabi, they are so stupid. No one benefiting from this donkey. No one's benefiting. No one's benefiting. No one's riding the donkey. So the next scene, it shows the donkey on Joha's back. The donkey, that means if you listen to what people are saying, eventually you're going to have the donkey on your back. You're going to be looking stupid. So many people don't know what happened here in America. And many people don't know what's happening in Palestine. The condition of the people in Palestine. The powers to be know, they know that once they took out their jobs, they brought in the drugs, then they made the war on drugs. And now you have in America, 60% of the people in the prison are Black and Hispanic. Black and Hispanic. And most of them are young. In the beginning, in the 60s and 70s, those the elders. Why did they do this? Because they want to kill. He said, divide and conquer. It's saying divide and conquer. They want to kill any aspirations of the people to stand up. So they started with the adults, the elders in the beginning. Now you see, majority of the people in the prison are youth. After bringing the drugs in, they made them depressed. Then they brought the drugs in. If you're depressed, what else are you gonna do? We have no idea of the future, no hope for the future. Something that started using drugs and all these things. And in Palestine, I mentioned last week that they started arresting the youth. In the beginning, it was the older Palestinians. Then they started arresting the youth. So they want to instill in them not only fear, but to kill any aspirations for the future. If they want to stand up and protest. Like I said, it is not going to happen. It is not going to happen. And it's not happening. When Allah says in the Quran, Allah says, فَقُلْ نَحْبِتُ مِنْهَا جَمِيعًا. One of the first messages that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to Adam alayhi salam when he sent him down to earth, فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُمْ مِنِّي هُدًى. And whenever guidance comes to you, my guidance comes to you. فَمَنْ تَبِعَ هُدَايَ. Whoever follows my guidance, Allah says, وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ. They will have no fear. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. They will not be saddened and they will not be depressed. So our brothers and sisters in Palestine, they will not fall into fear or depression. Because why? They believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا متقبلا يا رب العالمين. So in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 114, Allah says, and who are more unjust than those who prevent the name of Allah from being mentioned in his mosque. And they strive to cause ruin therein. And they want to make those who enter it to be in fear. To be in fear. Imam Abdul-Lateef, he prefers the opinion that the specific connection to this verse is in relation to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Right? But we had other examples even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, during the Sulh Hudaybiyah, the Pact of Hudaybiyah, when they prevented the Prophet ﷺ from making Hajj to his house. From Allah's name being mentioned in his house. And also during the time of one of our other leaders. Salahuddin Ayyubi, but he, alhamdulillah, he was able to establish justice in that land and retake Palestine for the believers. Right? He stood up for justice, not only for the Muslims, but also for those who were in Muslims. Salahuddin Ayyubi. And this is why he was successful. And it said that in one day, because of his justice, 10,000 Christians became Muslim except Islam, because even the enemies of Islam during this time, they were even killing those who were Christians, men, women, and children. They didn't care. They didn't have any heart or mercy. But Salahuddin, this is an example that if we establish justice, we speak for justice, and I mentioned the hearts of the mankind between the fingers of Allah, if we try to establish justice for truth, not only for the Muslims, but for all people, the majority of people will stand up with us. would rise up with us. And this is what is happening now all over the world. All over the world, the people are standing with the Muslims for justice for Palestine. Justice for Palestine. There's a saying, it says, progressive, except for Palestine. Progressive, except for Palestine. That means people are progressive. They stand up for truth and justice. Like saying, truth and justice, except for Palestine. This is what America, the leaders, powers to be, are saying. This is what Biden is saying. We stand for justice, we stand for truth, except for Palestine. No, 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 no. No, Mr. President. No, Mr. President. Just like our leaders, African American leaders, stood up in the face of those in the past, we will stand up in your face and tell you no. Justice for all. Justice for all. Not only for the Native Americans, not only for the Mexicans, not only for the African Americans, but also for the Palestinians. You cannot say you stand for justice and forget about the Palestinians. No, Mr. President, no, America. This is what we must say. This is what we must stand up for, brothers and sisters. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب القبر وقنا عذاب الحشر وقنا عذاب الميزان يا عزيز يا غفور يا غفور رحيم ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك نبنا وإليك المصير ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم أقيموا الصلاة